Hello, you're very welcome to this recording of the EI Experience. This is an extract from a longer webinar that will walk you through an exercise that will give you an insight into how emotional intelligence touches you and everybody else in the world on a daily basis. You're going to get the best out of this recording if you grab a pen and paper and participate as if you were actually live on the webinar. So please work along with everybody else who was on the webinar, responding to the various prompts that I give you during the recording. At the end of the recording, I'll offer you an opportunity, if you're interested, to go and see what was actually going on in your brain at the time when you interacted with your good boss and your bad boss. And that's in a separate recording taken from the same webinar called The Neuroscience Behind the Emotional Intelligence Experience. So grab your pen and paper and get going. When people talk about emotional intelligence, they're often still stuck back with the sorts of definitions that were in Goleman's book in 96, 98. And they're very useful, don't get me wrong. But in a practical sense, understanding what do we mean by emotional intelligence when we talk about things in the real world, in the world you and I live in, where we're working in a very busy environment and where we're required to get results. When we talk about emotional intelligence, what is that? And over the next couple of minutes, yourself and myself, we're going to work together on an exercise for which you'll need a pen and paper. And please do get a pen and paper. It's really important you participate in this and not spectate. I promise you'll get much more value out of the session if you just work through the exercise with me. And we're going to look at the impact that emotional intelligence has already had on you in your life, and therefore by implication on pretty much everybody in the world and on their lives. So I'm going to take you back in time just for a moment. And I want you to think of the best boss you ever worked for. Now, if you're young, good for you. And you've never had yet a boss that you would say was really great or a best ever boss. Think of the best coworker or mentor that you ever worked around. And what I suggest is just write their name down on the top of your page. Write their name or their initials or whatever. It'll just get your mind thinking about them, because we're going to look back to how did they show up? What were they like? How did they behave? Now, in a few moments, I'm going to call out 6 behaviors, and I'm going to ask you how often did they display those behaviors? And to help you gauge that, you'll compare them to other people that you know. So you see down the bottom that we have, what would I call it? A rating scale that runs from 1 to 5. And it runs from significantly less than others, demonstrated this behavior significantly less than others, up to 5 demonstrates the behavior significantly more. So let's say, for example, if, let's say is a very funny person, tells very funny stories. If that was one of the behaviors, and you were thinking of your best ever boss, if this was a person who was endlessly cracking jokes, making puns, telling stories, and seeing the bright side, well, then you'd think they do that more than other people, I'll give them a 5. If they were people that were humor bypass, never told a story, funeral director type personality, you might say that they were more like a 1 because they demonstrated that behavior significantly less than others. So obviously, telling stories and being humorous is not one of the behaviors you want to work with. I'm going to read those out to you. I'm going to take the first one and give you an example of it. And then we'll go through the other 6 fairly quickly, or 5 fairly quickly. So the first one, to what extent did that person demonstrate awareness of their mood and their emotions? I was in a meeting a while ago with our CFO, MJ, and during that meeting, we knew there was going to be a little bit of friction. There was a little bit of a disagreement going on, so we were obviously well prepared. We walked into the meeting, we sat down, we did what everybody does in the world, talked about the weather, talked about the traffic, and so on. And just when the meeting was getting to that point where it was starting to heat up, because we were getting to the point where people, where the point of disagreement was, and the temperature was starting to go up, my colleague excused herself to the bathroom. And I'm sitting on one side of the table, 3 people sitting on the other side of the table, and we've just started into the frictional, challenging part of the conversation. And you can imagine, it kind of felt like swinging in the wind, and I just wonder, what the hey, where's she gone to suddenly, 2-3 minutes into the session. Anyway, she came back in after a couple of minutes, we carried on. And at the end of the session, when we were talking about it, she said, look, I had to leave the room at that point. just for a moment, because some of the things that people were saying were getting me so wound up, getting me so angry, getting me so triggered, that I really thought that I might say something that I could end up regretting. So I decided just to leave the room, take a few breaths. In fact, what she said was, her mom always told her, when you start to get triggered, go to the bathroom and run cold water over your wrists. My mom always told me count to 10 or take a deep breath. But either way, she demonstrated a great awareness of her mood and emotions. She knew she was getting angry. She knew she was likely to blow, and that gave her a choice. She was able to avoid doing that. So think back to your best boss and tell me, to what extent did he or she demonstrate awareness of their mood and emotions? 5 is very high awareness, 1 is very low, and it might be somewhere in between. So please just give it a score now, from 5 down to 1. 5 is high, 1 is low. So let's look at the other 5 behaviors, and they're much easier. To what extent did this great boss make other people feel appreciated? And that could be as simple as, good morning, how are you? Noticing people, saying hello to them, saying please, saying thank you. But you know what I mean when I say, did they make you feel appreciated? 5 is, they made everybody feel appreciated all the time. 1 is, they made nobody feel appreciated any other time. So please give them a score now. Were they a 5, were they a 1, or were they somewhere in between? To what extent was this best boss open and honest about mistakes? So when they screwed up, did they mea culpa, terribly sorry I dropped the ball, or were they the sort of person who looked for somebody to blame? 5 is, terribly sorry I screwed up, dropped the ball. 1 is, who can I stitch up for this? So give that best boss ever a score. 5 is high, 1 is low. 4th one, to what extent did they do the honest, the straight, the ethical thing? So when they had the decision to make, where there was a question of whether one would do the right thing or the wrong thing, and the wrong thing was easier to do, did they make the right, the correct, the moral decision? 5 is scrupulously honest, did the right thing every time. 1 is, did the slippery thing, the easiest thing. So when MJ, sitting in that meeting, realized that she was getting triggered and she left the room, she managed her emotions very effectively in that difficult situation. You and I and your best boss got angry, got sad, got anxious, got upset, got fearful at times. To what extent did they manage those emotions effectively so that they just kept going? 5 is like MJ. 1 is the sort of person that when you walk in the office, the first thing in the morning you say is, what sort of mood is she in? If your boss was what sort of mood is he in? Well, then it's a 1. If it was more like MJ, it's a 5. And then finally, recognizes others' hard work and achievements. And I think the gold standard of recognition is catch somebody doing something right in front of their colleagues and call them out and give them praise. So 5 is, they did that for everybody as much as they could. 1 is, they did it for nobody ever. So you've just given 6 of those behaviors a score of 1 to 5. So you've got something, if you add those up, you'll have a score that runs somewhere between 6 and 30. And we're going to come back to that in a moment. Now, let me just get you guys up in front of me. You'll notice that there is a hands up feature on the chat, in the chat box. So let me ask you, give me a hands up if you know somebody who, when they walk into the room, they suck the energy and the positivity and the energy and the positivity out of the room. Do you know anybody when they walk in, the room is just, it's a downer? Yeah, all the hands are going up. Everybody knows that. An old boss of mine used to call those people psychic vampires. He said, Derek, there are people walking around with an umbilical that they want to plug into positive people like you and I. They suck all the positivity out of them. They don't feel any happier, but you feel a great deal more negative. There are people who, by emotional contagion, just by entering a room, they suck the energy and the positivity out of them. So let me put down those hands again, and let me ask you a different question. Do you know anybody who is the exact opposite, who, when they walked in the room, things are just a bit better? They make you smile. It becomes a bit warmer and polite. Yeah, all the hands going up again. And you're seeing that person in your mind, right? Because the way we show up and the way we behave really directly impacts the way people feel. It's called emotional contagion. So I want you to think of your best boss. Bring your mind back to your best boss. And let's imagine that, say it's a Sunday night and you're thinking, or a Saturday night, depending on where you are in the world, and you're thinking of going into work the following day after the weekend. How did you feel around that person? How did they make you feel? So what I'd like you to do is think, how do those people make you feel? And just write down over the next 15 seconds, I'm going to get my timer going here, just write down 3 words that describe how they made you feel. Write it down on your page. They made me feel disappointed, sad, and anxious, or they made me feel happy, upbeat, whatever. Just 3 words. I'll give you a couple of seconds there. How did they make you feel? What was it like to be around them? Okay, good. Then a final question, okay? Now, this is an expression you may or may not have heard of, discretionary effort. I know that you've heard of employee engagement. Employee engagement is the extent to which people want to do the jobs they're doing. And when people are engaged, all of the research says productivity is higher, commitment is higher, profitability is higher. Well, Gallup used the expression discretionary effort to describe that extra effort that we give when we're doing a job with which we're engaged. So it's the extra mile, I'll often say. It's the extent to which we go the extra mile. And for some people and some jobs, we go the extra mile. So what I'm going to ask you to do is think about how much did that boss motivate you to go the extra mile. Now, I don't want you to think how hard did you work in that job. I just want to tell me on a scale that runs from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, how much did they motivate you to do the very best you could? 1, 2, 3 is a low score. I was only there for the check. They had no motivational impact on me. And 8, 9, 10 is I would have run through a brick wall for that person. The sorts of things you say, if it's an 8, 9, 10, is I did some of the best work I ever did with those people or that person. They helped me do things I didn't even know I was capable of. So give them a score. 8, 9, 10 is high, 1, 2, 3 is low. So that's the bright side. I apologize, but I'm going to the dark side. And if I could see your face, if you were doing this in front of a group of people and you asked them to think of the worst ever boss that they had, you can see their mood drop in their face. You possibly felt your mood dropping depending on the experience that you had. And please write their initials or their name at the top of the paper, because we're going to do the same exercise with them really, really quickly. So what I want you to do is think of, to what extent did that worst boss you ever worked for demonstrate awareness of his or her mood and emotions? 5, extreme awareness, knew exactly when they were being triggered. 1, absolutely none. They were like a firework, light the blue touch paper and stand clear. 2, makes others feel appreciated. 5 is they did it for everybody all the time. And 1 is nobody ever. So give them a score. To what extent was that worst boss open and honest about mistakes? 5 is high and 1 is low, once again. Write down a score. To what extent did they do the right thing, the moral thing, the correct thing, even when it was difficult to do so? So did they make ethical decisions? 5 high, 1 low. Were they the firework or were they the Zen master? Now, don't get me wrong. Every single person on this planet gets triggered. Now, there's always a choice. It may not feel like it in the moment. There's always a choice when you're triggered. 1 is follow the emotion. And anger, boom, explode, get angry, and inhabit the feeling. The other one is understand it, manage it, and work and push on through. Did this person push on through, or did they get lost in the feeling? So 5 is they pushed on through. You knew they were stressed, but they kept functioning. 1 is they exploded or they gave into it. And finally, to what extent did they give recognition? You know, did they recognize others' hard work and achievements? So once again, you should have a score when you add that up that goes somewhere between 6 and 30. And it's not unusual in live sessions for people to say, hey, can I give a negative score on this one, or can I give a 0 score on this one? So if you did end up with less than 6, which you shouldn't, I understand what the message you were giving was. So once again, it's Sunday night. and you're thinking about working with this person who was the worst boss you ever worked for, please, next 15 seconds, write down 3 words to come into your mind to describe how you feel or how you felt around them. How did they make you feel? Okay, finally, for this chap or chapess, to what extent did that person motivate you to go the extra mile? Not how hard did you work, not how much work did you do, because most people work as hard as their values tell them they should. So I want you to say, to what extent did they turn you on or off? 1, 2, 3 was they had no effect in increasing my motivation. 8, 9, 10 was I always wanted to do the best I could for them. So give them a score. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the list of you guys up here in front of me on the chat. Where is my chat? Just 1 second. Here we go. And I'm going to just debrief this very, very quickly. And I'm going to ask you, and for this to be successful and to work well for you and work well for me, what I need to do is ask you to interact with me. So here's how we're going to do this. Tell me, what was the score that you gave your best boss? So please enter it into the chat line or into the chat box right now. What score did you give your best boss? So there's a 27 from Johan, 28 from Annette, 29, 24, 28, 26, 27, 25, 21, 29. And thank you very much. And if we stayed on here long enough, what you'd see is the same trend as you see when we do that absolutely anywhere in the world, any culture, any language group, anything, no matter what they do. If you're looking in the chat box, you're probably seeing, or you are seeing, that the scores are running somewhere from a low of 21 up to a high of 29. Just out of curiosity, if anybody put in a 30, will you re-enter it again? I'm just curious if there are any 30s in there, because you get an occasional 30. But generally speaking, what you get is a range of scores that go from north of 20, typically though, more north of 25. And if I was to average these scores out, I'm probably getting something's coming in around 25, 26, 27. I'm not a mathematical sort of person. But just notice that the best boss is scoring an average that's somewhere around 25, 26. Now let's go to the Darth Vader of your boss world. What was the worst boss like? What scores did you give the worst boss? So we got a 9, we got a 13, we got a 15, a 12, an 11, 10, 19. Okay, let me do this, and thank you very much for those. Anything lower than 9, if you've already put it in, pop it in again anyway. Anything lower than 9. So there's a 6 coming up, okay? A 7, an 8, an 8, another 8. Anything higher than 15, just pop the 15. If you have anything higher than 15, there's a 14. 17, okay, there's a 17. Oh, there's a 19 in there as well. Now, for the most part, when I look at these scores, in general, with nearly every group, where regardless who you do it with in the world, the worst boss will tend to come out, excuse me, very low double figures, typically, or very often into single figures. And I've got a range here that goes from 6 up to 19. There are 2 there, sort of 17 and 19, they're outliers. And I'm really pleased for the folks who got 17, 18, 19, because it means that your worst boss actually wasn't all that bad. They were actually pretty okay. And they showed up in a way that was pretty okay. We'll see what I mean by that in a moment. But if I took those outliers out and I looked at the others, I've got an average score that's coming in around 9 or 10. So the average for the best one was around 25, 26. And the average for the other one is 9 or 10. And the only observation I want you to make right now is that all you did was think, how did they show up? How did they behave? How did I see them behave? And it was very, very different. They're very distinct. There was more than a 2-to-1 disparity between them. So let's move on and just open this up a little bit more and say, oh, wrong mouse, and say, how did your best boss make you feel? Give me a couple of words for this. Now, apologies, it's going to go by very quickly, so I won't grab all of your words, but pop in maybe the, okay, valuable, energized, comfortable, happy, motivated, empowered, capable, appreciated, interested and valued, trusted and appreciated, relaxed, special, respected, motivated, valued, welcome, inspired. You see those going up in front of you. These are really, let's put it this way, very simply. When the organization hired that person, they hired somebody who delivered, because they hired them to engage you and they made you feel valued, empowered, fortunate, empowered and energized, happy, motivated, comfortable, just so many things. And these are the words we get, whether you're doing it through a simultaneous translator in China or Russia, or you're doing it in Africa, or you're doing it in Europe. It doesn't matter. We're all humans. And the way we show up has a big impact on the way people feel. And if you doubted that for a minute, why don't you share with me the top word out of those three that you gave the worst boss that you ever worked for? How did they make you feel? Irritated, dread, stupid, worthless, despondent, uncertain, uncomfortable, strange, intense, dirty, frustrated, annoyed. Holy God. Now, you know, in those words, you really feel the experience that people had working with that person. And look at the difference so far. I mean, what we're looking at so far is the best boss made you feel valued, energized, comfortable, happy, motivated, excited, capable. The worst one, and I just have a few: angry, scared, ill, anxious, demoralized, sick, irritated, dreadful, worthless, and I think that's despair down the bottom, anxious. And by the way, the biggest problem we have in the working world today is one of anxiety and stress. We do not need to go to work to get, oh, now there's one, somebody said suicidal. And that comes up every so often. In fact, in one of the sessions a while ago, somebody said, like, killing me or her. And people kind of giggle when you say that, and yet they giggle because it's uncomfortable, because they understand exactly where they're coming from. The way you show up can have a dramatic impact upon people. So what I want you to notice so far is the person who scored really high on demonstrating those behaviors that we had there made you feel valued, energized, comfortable, happy, and motivated. So the way they showed up very much determined in large part the way you felt. The person with the low scores and didn't demonstrate those behaviors made you feel irritated, dreadful, suicidal, demotivated, sick, anxious, and so on and so forth. So there's a very big difference between them. And the key thing is, we all see it. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be as complicated as emotional intelligence is often made out to be. It is simply about the way we show up. One final question, and then we'll move on. What was the number you gave for the extent to which your best boss motivated you to do the best? To what extent did they make you want to do the very best you could? What did you get for that? 10, 8, 9, 8, anything lower? 7, anything lower than 7, 9, 4, okay. 10, 10, 10. Okay, I wish I was actually on a microphone, which I'd really love to know what the background the 4 was. But basically what we got is we got a range that runs from 7 to 10, and most of them are 10s, 9s, 8s, as you can see. Tell me about the Darth Vader character. What about the worst boss you ever worked for? What numbers? There's a 4, there's a 5, there's a 1, there's a 0, there's a 2, 2, 3, 3, 0, 0. I think going by, so most of them are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The majority, the vast majority are 1, 2, 3. And I think I saw a 10 going by. And I'd love, again, if I was face to face with you, I'd love to explore it, because very often what people say is, that person irritated me so much, made me feel so bad that I went out of my way to drive myself to do the best job I had ever done. And as soon as I had done that, I left. And that's very frequently, people are motivated by a demotivating boss in the short term. And then when they get close to the point of burning out, after they've proven what they're capable of, they move on. And here's the message I want to give you, is that the way you show up, Aoife just said to me, that wasn't a 10, Deiric, that was a minus 10. Okay, so thank you for clarifying, Aoife. So that was a minus 10. Thank you, minus 10. The bottom line is, the way you make people feel is critically important. And that's all. People get into complicated explanations of what emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence is having the awareness to be able to manage the way we show up
so that we manage the way we make people feel, because that has a tremendous impact on everything. Here's the mantra that I often train people in our certification. I say to them, just remember, and this is what you've just seen experimentally, it's what the research says as well. The way you show up, so the way you behave, just a simple way you behave, determines the way people feel. The way they feel determines the extent to which they engage. And the extent to which they engage determines everything about the outcome of that relationship. If you're a salesperson and you make people feel, what do we get? Irritated, dreadful, worthless, depressed, etc., you're not going to sell much. If you're a leader trying to lead people, you're not going to lead them very effectively. You're not going to engage them. But if you're making people feel valuable, energized, comfortable, happy, and motivated, like your great boss did, well, then you get positive results from people. And that's not just from the people you work with. That's from your spouse, from your children, from your friends, from everybody you ever interact with. The way you show up determines the way they feel. The way they feel determines the extent to which they engage, and that determines the outcome of the relationship. Emotional intelligence is managing the way you show up so that you get the best impact upon people. What you've just done, by the way, several of you have already gone through the assessment. By the way, I'm going to say this a few times before the end, it costs a little bit of money to do that assessment, and you're getting it at no cost. Take the opportunity, because you get an opportunity to look through the eyes of other people. How do they see you show up? But for those of you who've already gone through the assessment, you'll probably have recognized some of those items, because we took out of the Genos model, we took one item from each of the 6 scales. Now, each of the 6 scales, like self-awareness, has 7 items on it. And we just took one of those items out. So from self-awareness, which is the extent to which you're aware of your mood and emotions and the way they impact others, we took demonstrates awareness of their mood and emotions. From awareness of others, which is the extent to which you are aware of other people's emotions and feelings and the extent to which it's impacting the way they show up and the things they say and the decisions they make, we took one. And with all of the other 6 scales, we took just one item out of them. Now, and with that one item, you were able very easily, very quickly to score dramatically differently the best boss you ever worked for and the worst boss you ever worked for. And that's what the core of emotional intelligence should be. It should be looking at, how are you showing up right now? What behaviors are you demonstrating that are working because you want to keep demonstrating? What ones are not serving you well? Now, with the best boss and the worst boss, it's very binary. It's very polarized. So we purposely picked, binary opposites, polar opposites. When you're looking at you and I and most people in the world, we're somewhere in between those poles. So that's why when we have 7 different behaviors under each of those scales, we get much more resolution on what's going well.
So now that you have some idea of how a small thing like the way you show up, the behaviors you display, can have such a large impact on the people around you, you might be interested to know what's going on inside your brain when you're having these interactions. If you are curious, just click on the button below to have a look at the video entitled The Neuroscience Behind the Emotional Intelligence Experience. This is again an extract from the same webinar that the EI experience was taken from. Enjoy.